Hey everyone, it's Chelsea and I am back with another video. I'm doing something a little bit different today, so I'm playing Batman Arkham Knight, but I'm actually going to be doing a different type of content to go with this. I tried recording this video about 3 or 4 months ago and I found I didn't like it. I was just a little bit too robotically, just talking straight me to you. I was a little bit uncomfortable, so I'm going to be reading. I've got a little sheet of paper down here and one on the ground. So I'm going to be looking down occasionally, but I'm going to be reading that and playing at the same time. I am actually here, this video is kind of inspired by Bailey Sarian's Murder Mystery Makeup. Obviously I am not doing makeup because I don't usually wear it, but I'm going to be talking about the horrible tragedy of what is known as the Port Arthur Massacre, which happened in Port Arthur in April of 1996. This is going to be going into the perpetrator's actions as well as the positive things that came out of it. I don't want to just focus on the negative. This is about the talk with gun control, especially when you look at a country like America where they have a big gun issue epidemic. Just the way that the Port Arthur Massacre is kind of sort of used as the catch-all, and I wanted to break it down to be, well, what happened, what were the immediate ramifications, and how has that impacted life in Australia, just in general, with how we handle gun violence and those kind of associated problems. So, I'm going to start the game, but to begin with, this the perpetrator is a Mr. Martin Bryant, who, I don't know where I'm going, who perpetrated this incident on the 28th of April 1996 in Port Arthur, Tasmania. Tasmania is a gorgeous little island at the bottom of Australia. So, Mr. Bryant was armed with semi-automatic rifles and drove to Port Arthur, where he went just north of the little township that is there and entered the home of a couple that he did seem to somewhat know, shot and killed both of them when they were in their home. Now, I think from memory he did have a small conversation with them before he did this. He then drove down to the historical site where he ate a meal. So he ate lunch there straight after killing two people, which is a bit weird. After killing these two people, Mr. Bryant then went to the Broad Arrow Cafe, which is right up near the historical centre where the majority of this is unfortunately placed. He had his lunch. He then took out a rifle in the middle of this big cafe where it was lunchtime, and he also killed a bunch of people there. So within the first 90 seconds, 20 people were dead and 12 were injured. He then went to the adjacent car park and began shooting again. This time he killed 4 people and injured many more. After driving from the historical site, there was an original toll booth that he then went to, and when he was there he then killed another 7 people at that same toll booth, and then drove off with one of the victims' cars. Now, while he was driving, he did actually take a hostage at a general store. And then also, while driving back to this couple's home, he did actually start shooting out of the car, where he injured several more people on the drive back to this people's home. At the deceased couple's home, Martin then set fire to this stolen car, so just to apparently erase any evidence, which I don't think is how this works, and took the hostage inside. Now, police had been called throughout this and they were actually waiting for the victim to be released. Throughout the night, shots were being fired at the police, and eventually the hostage was killed during the night. And in the morning, Martin had actually set fire to the property and attempted to flee the scene, where he was then captured by police. So Bryant's trial actually didn't begin until the 7th of November 1996, where he initially pled not guilty to the charges but was later persuaded. The Supreme Court Justice William Cox had handed down 35 life sentences, one for each of the people he killed, and 1,652 years in prison consecutively without parole. The first 8 months of his sentence was actually served in what can be described as a solitary confinement unit. Bryant began showing self-harm tendencies when he slit his wrists in March of 2007 with a razor blade, and then his throat later on down the track. As far as my research goes, so he's moved around from prison to prison. As of 2021, he is actually in a maximum security prison in Hobart, Tasmania. But I wanted to go into the politician side of what happened, so what had actually come as a sort of a proactive reaction, if that's the right terminology to use. What positives came out of this horrible tragedy? One of the interesting things I found out in my research was that the government only make legislation regarding importing of firearms into Australia as per the laws of private gun ownership. After the massacre, the coalition federal government had actually worked towards states and territories to work together to have identical gun laws. So we would all have the same gun laws all around the country. We actually fully banned automatic firearms and self-loading and pump-action weapons as well. Mandatory 28-day cooling off period was implemented before a gun license can be granted, as well as compulsory safety courses, and the need to supply a genuine reason for owning a gun that did not include self-defense. That's probably one of the biggest keys here. Prime Minister John Howard, who was our Prime Minister from, I believe, 1996 until about 2008, was actually berated by pro-gun lobbyists. He showed up to a pro-gun advocacy group with a bulletproof vest on. He was very much ridiculed for that. The coalition government were actually previously in support of gun ownership, but then lost the support after John Howard's incident, quote unquote, by gun advocates and lobbyist groups. It took about 4 months for the Howard government to convince all states and territories to adopt the law changes to be in conjunction with the 1996 National Firearms Agreement. So we have in Australia what's called a gun buyback and amnesty programs, which are something that we've actually had for the last few years. So the gun buyback and amnesty are actually now just something that you can do year round. It doesn't matter when you do them. And there were people that were actually getting, in some cases, Medicare benefits when this originally occurred back in 1996. And this just allowed people basically to hand in their guns, no questions asked. You wouldn't be charged for any legal or illegally owned guns. It would just be, thank you for doing this. Oh man, the game crashed. There were about 700,000 guns that were actually surrendered during this amnesty gun buyback program. Now that estimated to around about 1/3 of the guns that were in the country at the time, which is insane. Since then, no real suicides have been recorded for guns. There have been obviously a few here and there, as well as homicides. Homicides have greatly reduced since this period as well. Now, obviously, there have been, especially in the last few weeks, there have unfortunately been a few incidents of gun violence in the country, but they are significantly less than what they would have been if they were allowed to continue. Now, this is obviously a real sore spot, but it's something that needs to be changed in the world, and this is something where if we don't use a tragedy as a catch-all for something that, because I didn't know a lot of this before I started researching it, so I wanted to get the research, that way I knew, okay, is this all accurate? Are we ensuring that hey, do we have all the facts? Because I always assumed, and it was wrongfully, obviously, that Australians just didn't have guns, which we do. We very much still have them in our country. But they are legislated in a way where we have less gun violence, but we can still own guns. So the way that we do it, there is on the government website, and I'm going to be linking all my sources in the description below. There is actually a government website which shows your ownership category and what you need to follow in order to actually have the guns. So you may have it for a recreational reason, let's say, and that's under a certain category. Now through that, you need to do a mandatory safety check. You need to do a mandatory criminal background history. For some of them, you need to be a member of the club that you're associated with for a year, and you need to undergo significant gun training to even get the right to own a gun in the first place. You then need to, they will go around and check, you actually need to have a secure location to store your gun. Now, this is usually in a safe deposit box because they don't want you obviously having them out for people to see. What if children get a hold of them, etc., etc. And I believe with some clubs, they actually come around and do random checks. They give you like a notice that they're coming around. It's probably like 24 hours, but they do come around and actually check to make sure that you are storing it correctly, which is something that I feel a lot of people don't understand, that it is a very significant thing to even just store it correctly. It's one thing now, I just, in general, I don't like guns. I just don't. I feel like there's too much can go wrong with them. But it's kind of a slippery slope because you get a lot of people that know how to use them properly and they take care of them very well. And then you get the people like this who will, ruin it for everybody. And it's horrible. So I feel like we need to look at those steps where you don't need to get rid of guns. You don't. It's not a thing. What you need to do is you need to legislate in a way that will secure them. So how do you go about making gun ownership safer? Because it's at the end of the day, it's a mental health thing, but it's also a security measure too. So that's where I think America can learn that, hey, yeah, you can have really stringent gun control policies without actually giving up your corporate donors, because that's a thing apparently. And you don't have to have so many people who are injured and lose their lives in the process of something that can be mandated and regulated in a way that doesn't impact on people's freedoms, I guess, to own a gun. There's a lot of nuances to these things that we need to look at, and we need to realize, oh yeah, maybe we can do some good things with looking at what other countries have done and how they've lessened their gun violence. The rest of the Australian government should look at, hey, we need to look at teaching our kids about this to identify, hey, was this behavior that we can look to stop, to eliminate. It, like I said, it does come down to a mental health problem, but it's not also impacted by mental health. There's a lot of nuances. Some people are just evil for the sake of being evil. We need to compartmentalize and put aside that maybe it isn't necessarily a mental health issue, because mentally ill people are more likely to harm themselves than other people. Yes, they might still do both, but they are more likely to harm themselves. They wouldn't necessarily go around and try to harm other people because they already feel hurt themselves. There are just people in this world who are pure evil who will then just try to injure and possibly kill others. It's horrible to think about. This was a slightly different video than what I thought I would ever make, but I feel like it's important to say. I'm trying not to copy Bailey Sarian, but thank you, girl, for inspiring me to do this. Thank you all for watching, and if you have any other videos that you want me to do that are similar to this, where it's not necessarily pointing out the crime, but the positive things that unfortunately came out of that, please let me know. I would love to do research and maybe look at what games to pair with it. I would love to look at doing this. I feel like it's just a slight shift in what is usually done in in my videos, but it is just different enough. Hopefully you'll learn something that you didn't know before. It's always interesting to learn more about why we have certain processes like we do. I feel like we don't necessarily give enough time to learn about these kind of things, which is a shame because we really should. They are there for a reason, and they were unfortunately created there for a reason. This one is obviously a very tragic reason as to why it was created, but it's an important one nonetheless. It's integral to, you know, how we overcame a challenge that came into our lives, and we made the best possible outcome that we could at the time. There's obviously things that can change about anything, and I think it's healthy skepticism to look at, well, what can be improved. But if you're just outright saying, well, no, nothing should be done about it, you know, as politicians are, they can be greedy, then you don't deserve to be in that position of power, is what I personally think. But I might be wrong, I don't know. Anyway, I will see you all next time. Bye everyone. Bye.